We're now going to turn our attention to systems-based approaches to investing in agriculture and food, with a closer look at how some organizations are actually doing it. So Ivo Degn of Climate Farmers will provide a fascinating update to the work that they have been doing on convening both stakeholders across the system and investors. And Calla Ostrander will share her and her team's work at Terra Regenerative Capital, and they're working on investing in the middle and creating markets, which we did have a question that somebody submitted just a few moments ago that we didn't get to. So your question will be answered, whoever asked that. Both of these operations are moving systems-based investing past the theory stage and putting it into action. So I know they're just getting their microphones on right now, but let's have a nice, fun welcome for Ivo and Calla. And then we'll just keep clapping. We'll just keep clapping and clapping and clapping. Yes, Calla is waking the walk. Yep, keep clapping. Keep clapping, guys. Thank you. You're a trooper. We're also making sure that all of our speakers get their steps in, going back and forth to microphones today. Welcome. No, he's just coming. He's just slow on. All right, now, so Ivo doesn't feel left out. Please, a round of applause for Ivo as he walks the line here. Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. So, everybody who's here in the room probably agrees that regenerative agriculture is happening. That the transition to regenerative agriculture is happening, and that, sort of everything is good, but then why is it so difficult to invest in this, right? Is it that we don't have the farms that are moving forward? Is it that we don't have the businesses that are doing this? Is like we just don't have anything to invest in? Probably not the case, right? I don't know how to change the slides, by the way. Is there somebody? Yes, thank you. So let's take this is just an imaginary example, but it could be any farm in Europe, right? So let's take Maria. Maria has transitioned her farm and is working with regenerative almonds, is starting to see the results in the soil, is starting to see better water retention, biodiversity, etc., and has higher quality crops. But there is no market and there is no processing in her area, so she has to sell her higher value crops still on the conventional market, not gaining anything for it. She has also diversified her production, and she has other crops which she can't market either, because in her area that's not usual and what anyone does, so there's no benefit of this. Does that make her a worse farmer? Not really, right? Like, she's an amazing farmer. We've heard earlier from Joao and the other farmers, there's all of these really, really amazing regenerative farmers who are in a system that is not optimized for them, but that is optimized for single monocrop industrial agriculture. So we have farms and we have businesses that are doing amazing work, but due to the system that they are in, they cannot sort of take the whole value of what they are doing. So, meaning we have the farms, we have the businesses, they're good farms, they're good businesses, but we don't have the system that allows these farms and these businesses to be fully investable, to be safe. So basically the case that I'm going to make today is that as investors, and I'm using this term broadly to include everything from philanthropy to very return-oriented, as investors, we need a system that is going to enable our investments to really shine, right? 1 year ago, we presented at RFSI the idea of a European-wide nexus, like a hub for the coordination of systemic action in the European agri-food system, right? Like we are all doing a lot of work, but there is the potential of doing it together and in that way de-risking the transition for everyone. And it is a matter of social technology, it's a matter of trust, it's a matter of working together that is going to enable us to do this. Today I'm glad to present that this nexus is alive and well. It is happening, and this is the invitation I want to say today to all of you. Sarah challenged me to speak about systemic investment without being fluffy. So this is what I'm going to try today. And essentially summarizing it with three main things. We have the aspect of where we invest, we have the aspect of how we invest, and we have the aspect of who we invest with, right? So let's start with the first point. Over the last year, we have been mapping the European agri-food system, the dynamics of the European agri-food system. So the question is, if we are also interested in regenerative agriculture, if the benefits are there, the carbon, the biodiversity, the resilience, the water, the et cetera, why are we still stuck, right? And so we map the dynamics and how exactly they work and how in each case different actors are sort of stuck and held back from moving forward to the future that they already know they need to move into, right? So this map is public. We've published it yesterday. It's on our LinkedIn, Climate Farmers, or if you look for my name. What this gives us is a number of leverage points, intervention points, or intervention opportunities, pathways, which we can work on, where we see that there is a potential for deep transformation. Right? So when we have an intervention, you can always intervene in a way that has deeper or less deep impact, right? Typical case, you get sick, you can take the medication that is going to suppress the symptoms, or you can work on the root symptoms, right? We all know this example. So we're looking for where do we have the intervention points that are going to give us the largest transformative potential. Here's a couple of examples. I'm not going to go into the details here, but to make the point, when we invest, again, philanthropically and not philanthropically, do we look at the right leverage points, the right leverage opportunities where the biggest change can happen, or are we working on the symptom level? So that's where we invest. It's a lot of work to research this. Then the other question, how do we invest? Do we invest in a way that enables our investments to act in the way that is intended, right? Like Joao made the point earlier, that as a farm, you're talking about long-term returns, right? And in regenerative agriculture, we have long-term and compounding returns that are incredibly valuable, but expect a short-term return, and it's a very worthless investment, right? And it also restricts the farm from doing the interesting work. The same goes for many of the organizations in the space, right? So if we're talking about philanthropy, long-term investments and the expectation of impact metrics need to be put at the end of a long-term process. So rethinking what are the terms of our investment is crucial to enable that the investment is actually successful when it comes to systemic impact. And this will depend on the individual case, right? It will depend on the individual investment, how the terms need to be. So there needs to be flexibility. And then the third point, who do you invest with? Because if we look at any case, anywhere from sort of European, sort of large-scale system-wide, or if we look at local and regional, it doesn't work to invest in the individual business, right? Like we cannot look at the individual farm without the processing, without the off-taker, without the food brand, and without the peer-to-peer learning, without the technical advice, and without the research, right? So, and this is something that usually there's very few actors, like for example, the Nest or a few others that can invest across the spectrum, but most of investors are going to invest in a specific area. So you need to team up with other investors and collaborate so to de-risk the individual investment that you're working with. So looking at grant funding, public funding, institutional investment, and classic return-based impact investing. So in the last year, this is what we have set up with what we call the consortium, which is our network that sort of provides the insight into the system, where we do the research on where to invest. So we look at how exactly does the system work, and then really go into these feedback loops and see, okay, where exactly in a specific sort of, let's say, self-reinforcing feedback loop do we have the opportunity to change something, right? So just an example, we have the case of large corporates which influence policy, and sort of that reinforces itself, right? The influence of large corporates influencing policy, influencing or enhancing extractive agriculture or industrial agriculture, supporting industrial entities, corporates, in supporting specific types of policy, etc., etc. So where do we have the specific leverage point to change something there? So this is the where we invest. And then the second conversation, it's interesting that this visual is turned around. The second point is then how do we invest together? And this is our co-funding alliance, where a large group of funders, many of them already here in the room, are coming together to look at, okay, well, here I have an investment that I'm really interested in, but it's maybe too risky to do alone. So I'm looking for other investors to come along again across the entire spectrum of return expectations. This is running already. We have over 30 funds, funders, family offices, foundations as part of this, and sort of we're looking at what are the most impactful interventions in the system that we can have right now. And at the core of this is a pooled fund that can be invested in directly. So this is the very quick summary of how we understand systemic investment to work. Again, we have where do we invest, how do we invest, with who do we invest. There is this amazing opportunity we have right now of a space that is ready for change in a way that I think rarely any other space is ready. We have everybody in the room. So now it's a question of, can we coordinate in the way that is going to make this happen as quickly as possible? And within that relatively small window of opportunity we have right now, again, we have everything that we need. The question is, can we use the energy that is here and take that into sort of the whole year, basically run RFSI all year round? Now I'm looking forward to a conversation with Calla to sort of explore how specifically does this work in practice, right? Because this is still a bit on the theory level. So really looking forward to that. Thank you.
Thanks, Ivo. Just a real quick show of hands, just to see who's listening. How many people know what happened with the El Nino La Nina year this year? Anybody? Somebody want to say what happened? Yeah. What happened?
We have 14,000 hectares of farmland in Brazil, and everything was completely wiped out by fire last year. So we had the whole Cerrado biome in Brazil, the Amazon, pretty much on fire. This was last year due to El Nino.
Yeah. So what happened is, since the industrialization of fossil fuels, and we're going to get to our conversation, but I just want to make sure your all attention is here, because when Ivo says the time is now, for the first time ever, the El Nino La Nina exchange failed to cool the oceans. So usually we have this cooler system that comes in and balances it out. And over the last 100 years, you can kind of see global temperatures going up, but you got El Nino years, La Nina, El Nino, La Nina, like this. But this year, the oceans didn't actually cool down, they got warmer. So this is the first time this has ever happened globally, that the ocean temperature failed to cool in this normal oscillating pattern that the globe has. So it's really, really hot out there. There's a lot of heat in the system. And it's really important that we come together right now to create a new economy to really move photosynthesis. And agriculture is the largest way we move carbon via photosynthesis. It's the largest way we manage photosynthesis is through agriculture. So the mechanism we have for cooling the planet is really in our hands, quite literally, and in our food system. So I just want to start that off as like some context for why maybe we could say like, all bets are off. Like, it's a new game. Let's think differently.
Wonderful framing. Thank you very much. I'm super curious. So here we're talking about the European context a bit more. I know that you've been working in the US context for quite some time on this, and I'm curious, what is your experience, what is your perspective on sort of some of the things that I talked about in terms of like building the ecosystem for regenerative agriculture businesses to succeed?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think what you all are doing here is really awesome, Ivo, and I appreciate that you have enough like coordination to do it. In America, we all have really big egos, so we kind of have to like position people a little differently. You know, people like to do what they think is their idea. Right now, it's really important that we all listen to each other and to the ideas that are out there and figure out what role we can play in larger collective ideas like the one you're moving forward. In agriculture, you know, the fundamental system in the economy is supply and demand. We have farmers who are creating supply. We have demand in the market. So how did we get there? Well, in the last 15 years in the United States, as a movement, before I was with Terra Regenerative Capital, I was an activist and also worked with philanthropy and with governments, the state of California. We built up that demand by getting corporate commitments. Corporate buying commitments was a huge source of how we started to establish demand in that market, and then schools and states. We passed 36 states now have soil health policy. So there's this big market, farmers' supply and demand. Well, supply also requires technical assistance. So the three key features we spent a long time creating were available technical assistance, Mad Agriculture, the initial family foundation, initial foundation of the family of the MAD system, which is their nonprofit, supports tech know-how for farmers. There's a lot of other know-how we invested in philanthropically. And then we looked at policy and supporting funding, so state policy and federal funding. We have a lot of that federal funding is held up, but we were successful in securing historic amounts of funding for farmers in the United States, and we were successful in getting those corporate commitments. So farmer know-how, additional government funding, and corporate commitments. Now the other sort of little piece of that that's really important, two things. One, consumer awareness. So you all might have heard of Kiss the Ground. There's been a lot of different farmers' footprint. People have put out a lot of media to gain consumer awareness around this. And then where I work now is this market access piece. This market access piece is so important because it's what allows the farmer to get into markets they couldn't otherwise, to get a market for a cover crop that's a new crop, to get into a value-added market. A wool farmer in California or a sheep herder in California maybe gets 37 cents per pound for their unwashed wool. That merino wool, California actually produces high-quality wool is better than New Zealand, which you don't know, because it has to be sent to China or Texas to be processed. That merino wool sells for like $73 an ounce when it's finished. That farmer is not getting that value. So now I really work in that missing middle of the supply chain.
Wow. There's that saying that I often think about of like system change happens very gradually and then very suddenly,
yes.
Right? And I think this is a great example of like you do a ton of sort of groundwork of creating farmer knowledge, research, offtake agreements, et cetera, for then the movement to really take off and happen very quickly, right?
Yes. Absolutely.
And I think this is a great example of this.
Yeah, so that's such a good point, and we've spent this time building that framework. So people think about free markets. Well, democracy and capitalism go hand in hand. They are partners in a system that creates the space that we live in, and we're really seeing this acceleration. When we started investing 3 years ago in our demonstration portfolio, the deals were few and far between. And they were not really market rate. We had to utilize my network and the networks of our strategic partner, Amanda Hendy, to really find those deals. Today, we have a wonderful pipeline of deals that we will invest in as soon as we make our first close. and that these deals we're seeing actually have market rate returns. When we first started, we thought, gosh, we'd have to be concessionary. And now what we're seeing is, no, we can actually invest in businesses that have market rate returns. We still have a catalytic investment option into our fund because we do want some of our investments to exit back to the employees and to the farmers. So we are anticipating like some employee buyouts, which will have more of like a 5 to 10% return, but otherwise we're seeing much more market rate. And all of a sudden it's like, 3 years ago we had to go like knock on Phil's door and be like, Phil, what are you doing? What do you got? And now we're just like, they're coming to us and we're seeing that. So it really is a moment of acceleration.
I think this is such an interesting case of like, you didn't even expect that kind of return and then it happened. Can you talk to us a bit about the structure of your fund? Because one of the things I'm super excited about, like talking about here, is the fact that you have sort of that flexibility of choosing and how you set that up. Can you talk about how you set that up?
Yeah, so our fund is, it's equity, but we also now are doing debt with a debt partner. And then we set up it so you can come in as a catalytic investor, and that helps then reduce the risk for the market rate investors. There are some family offices in this space that want to see non-traditional, I wouldn't say non-traditional, traditional capital come into a more non-traditional space, which is this one. So that's been really helpful in terms of having conversations. And then we also have, in terms of our broader structure, we have a services body, and that provides strategic services to our businesses like a light accelerator. Some of the folks that we see who are really truly regenerative thought leaders, who've been doing this for a long time, who know how to redesign systems, haven't necessarily gotten to where they need to get to be investable yet. And so we provide services where we take a future equity stake in that company to provide a service, they're maybe cash strapped, to get them to that investable point. And at that point, if we go through our diligence process, and if we choose to invest in them, we may choose to lead that investment. And I think that's really where we stand out, in that we're smaller in terms of our check size, but we're nimble and we're first in. And hopefully that sort of negotiation of how do we get this thing from a really good idea to a really good investment is where we play a role in the broader movement, and where we really want to dig in. To that end, we also have a small philanthropy that accompanies our work, and that helps support farmer transition. This year we're going to make a grant to do soil health baseline testing for Karen Springs farmers up in Washington. And then we also help CEOs and founders with their professional development, because folks often, again, maybe are coming from a really great background of agriculture, but they haven't been in boardrooms with venture capitalists, and they need some support to navigate that.
Yeah, I think this is a really great example of this aspect of how do you invest, right? Because we need to look at, okay, in order for these kinds of investment that we want to make, how does our structure need to be set up to support that, right? For the kind of founders we want to invest, okay, well, they might have really deep understanding of regenerative agriculture, but might not be the, let's say, Silicon Valley investor that has that kind of experience. Okay, well, how do we help them, right? So I love the fact that you have set it up in this way. I think in closing, if somebody were thinking about setting up a fund and really wanted to support systemic solutions in regenerative agriculture, what would you advise them with your experience now?
Come hang out with us. Agriculture is a really different economy than energy or than tech. And it behooves us all to understand the system that currently is there and where that system currently makes money and how it makes money, to your point, between all their puzzle pieces that all fit together. If you really want to come into this space, you need to understand those puzzle pieces and how those different types of money support different activities in the supply chains that make up our food system. And I think that's a really key piece if you want to come in. Also, don't reinvent the wheel. One of the things that we've been really surprised about is just how little money it takes to make catalytic change in the food system. I'll just close on this. We've seen the cellular meat market get between $1 and $3 billion in investment, depending on how you look at it, in the last 5 to 7 years. That's a lot of money. And the companies that are in that space are usually raising between 50 million to 500 million. Well, we're seeing businesses that are raising between 2 and 20 million or 2 and 30 million, and their ability to change both how agriculture is done on the landscape, food security for that community, economic sustainability for the farmers, landscape level carbon sequestration is so much greater. So I think I would just remind everybody that it's not in the moonshots, it's in the daily business of how agriculture gets done that we need to invest, and that actually doesn't take as much money as we all think it does. Yes, we need more money in this space. I'm not saying that. Please come into this space, please support and give financially and invest, but don't be fooled by the shiny objects. Look at the system and understand if you want to invest in the farmers, if you're investing in the future of our planet, understand that those investments are not going to be those big tech investments, although maybe they could be, but there's so much goodness to happen just in the middle of that supply chain.
I think such a great point. Thank you.
Thanks.
And I think just to end that point on sort of, hang out with us, I think the point of learning in this space, right? Learning with each other, from each other, it's going to accelerate this whole process so much. So just another invitation, if you're in the European space and you're interested in sort of working collaboratively on these systemic changes, come find me, come find Terra Calla in the US, and let's talk about how we can learn together. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ivo.